Now, those five biggest languages from the Romance language group, as you know, are French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, and Romanian. Now, though um, these languages are widely spoken, obviously in Europe, where they originated from Latin, Vulgar Latin actually, and then they spread the world. This has to do with the colonial history that Spain, France, Portugal, mostly those countries, had with other countries, especially in the Americas and Africa, but also on other places in the world. Now, French is also often used as a lingua franca. So, a lingua franca is a language that you can speak as a second language or as a first language with other people to actually bridge the communication gap that you would otherwise have. So, for instance, I'm Dutch, I'm not native English, but I'm using English as a lingua franca to actually get across the message and understand what you're saying, even though you might not be from uh, a country, English might not be your native language. Now, anyhow, going back to the lingua franca of French, which is the case in the Caribbean, for instance, or many African countries, they use French as a lingua franca, even though they have other local languages or other native languages. Now, um, if you're looking at Spanish, it's definitely the biggest. It's about 407, 470 million speakers of Spanish as a first language, and probably this data is already old, so probably it's even more. Probably babies get born every second speaking Spanish already, because they do talk a lot generally in those cultures, which is really good because you need to talk in order to learn a language. And I love Spanish, I love Italian, so it's good because I'm also a talkative person. So when I talk with Italians or people from Spain, you get to learn the language quicker than if you were to learn another language. No, I'm just kidding. Portuguese is a huge one, obviously mostly from Brazil, amounting all the languages, all the countries together. So Portugal, I think Mozambique, I think they speak Portuguese in Angola, obviously, on Cape Verde Islands, and Azore. All of it together is like 250 million and counting, right? French is the third biggest. It's 150 million speakers worldwide as a first language. Italian 90 million and Romanian 25. After that, I think you're getting Catalan, um, but I'll check that. Now, you have a lot of regional languages, and this will be my point in many videos because this is what is seemingly forgotten. When I was a kid, I thought that they speak French in France, Spanish in Spain, Portuguese in Portugal, Italian in Italy, and Dutch in the Netherlands. Now, I knew from the Netherlands that there are languages, another official one besides Dutch, such as Frisian, but I didn't know that this was also the case in other European countries, let alone in other countries worldwide. So I only found out much later, when we were on vacations, that on holiday, that actually we were in a region of Spain, the political Spain, that is actually called Catalonia. Now, I was there when we were like 10 years old, and I got this little booklet with images of Catalan words and how the Catalan differs depending on the region within the Catalan countries or lands. Now, I didn't really pay much attention to that language until I was actually studying in Barcelona as an Erasmus student, and later on I also did my internship there. Well, then obviously there's no way around it that they speak Catalan. I mean, in many cases, they wouldn't even address you in Spanish. They wouldn't even reply to you, even if you said, I made a mistake saying, eres español, instead of, hablas español. Do you speak Spanish? Rather than, are you Spanish? Well, that's a big no-no for Catalans, and I fully understand that now. I have a lot of Catalan friends, among some are Catalanistas. Now, I won't go much into the political story now, even though it's very interesting and very recent, now in 2018. But my point here is that regional languages in Europe are very, very important, are an essential part of the identity of many people or peoples, um, in terms of nations. And I think that even though it's very useful, practical, and obligatory to speak a national language um, as an official language, I think it's also equally important to value regional languages. Also, first of all, because it has this regional value of recognition, but it also really says a lot about the history. So not only will you respect people more, and they will respect you because they see that you actually understand them and that you understand what is driving them or what is important to them and what has been important to them in their lives. But secondly, also because this history, it's just very, very interesting to understand more about a local or regional and national and continental history. What did I say? Yeah, the culture of people, I think, is really, really essential, interesting. Now, not only does Spain, for instance, have multiple official languages, so besides the Spanish, which is sort of Castilian they call it, Castellano, you have Catalan, but also you have Basque and you have Galician. Now, I have traveled Spain for more than 30 times, and I've lived there, as I said. But even a lot of Spanish don't even agree on what languages are spoken on their Iberian Peninsula, or in their country, I should say. Now, I've traveled places such as Aragon or Basque Country, but also Santander, where you have languages like Aragonese. We went to Asturias, where you have Asturiano. Even within Asturias, people told me there are different ways, different dialects of Asturian language. Now, of course, it's always very difficult to say what is a language and what is a dialect, right? Some say, I think it was this Jewish linguist from the past who said, okay, a language is a dialect with a fleet and an army. Now, that's an interesting one. But then I don't think Catalan has a fleet or an army, and it's definitely a language. You can also state that you will need some poets or writers to at least have some literature in that language. Others would say it would need a standardization, so some kind of union that says, okay, now you're a language. Others would need an official status that would make Luxembourgish a language since 1986. But that would mean that before it was not a language and the day after it was. So in any case, you can see that politically is always very difficult when talking about what is a language, what is not. So I will now not define this any further, if Catalan is a language, if Asturian is a language, or Andaluz in the south of the Spanish, of the country of Spain, is a language. But I will just talk about those languages in this area that was once the Roman Empire, the Western Roman Empire later on, and that now has these modern versions of this vulgar Latin. So Galician in the north of Spain, northwest, is an official language. In obviously the region of Galicia it's spoken, and this is actually the cradle of Portuguese that obviously is spoken in Portugal and later on traveled the world during its colonial and trading times. Now, what else can we say? Sardinian, Sicilian, those are, I think, definitely languages because, well, this is what linguists generally say, and I think a lot of Italians and French would agree that those regions really speak another kind of, well, you wouldn't call it French or Italian, but another language, really. Now, generally, people from those areas far away from the capital of that political state also have a higher command of that national language. So, surely they can converse with French people from mainland or Italian peninsula in a more generally accepted Italian or French, the one that you will know from TV or media. One that in Italy particularly is very interesting because it's very new. It has been, first of all, the country is pretty new, like Germany. They're very modern nations, but secondly, because the media, and especially after radio and television, um, well, since the radio and television, these are nationalized languages, right? Before that, you had Dante writing, um, but the the people that traveled, they were covering the whole Italian peninsula, for instance. But other than that, what would a Sicilian do in Milan or a Venetian in on Sardinia? So those people didn't really have so much contact with each other before, let's say, the 20th century. And that's when you see that people also get to speak a national version of all these dialects. And that's purely practical, of course. But that doesn't mean, well, they can also feel Italian. They have a national identity, but especially in Italy, but also in other parts of Europe. And I'm sure that when I'm going to research more parts worldwide, it's the same thing. People also have a strong regional identity, and this is usually coincides with the language, and that I find particularly interesting. So when we're talking about Romance languages, of course we're thinking about French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, Romanian, but don't forget that Catalan, Occitan, a huge one in the south of France, and within Occitan you have dialects. Don't forget that those regions are the original, what should I say, areas of tribes that later on were isolated and created, well, not created, but maintained their own regional language. And just because another language from another region became superior politically or militarily or economically, that doesn't mean that linguistically it has a bigger status. It just had a better status in terms of politics because a central government from Paris, in the French case obviously, had influence over the other regions, but the Occitan spoken in the south, that has just been suppressed by Paris for a long time. Only in the past few decades it has been levied, or would you say it had been let go, that people were not allowed to speak this language. And now you can see the growth of this regional language popularity again. The same for Basque, which is obviously spoken in the southwest of France and the north of Spain, even much longer probably than the Romance languages that we are discussing today. The same goes for some Celtic languages in Normandy or Breton, and even some smaller languages. As I said, the what is it? The Mosel, the Franco-Mosel dialects such as Luxembourgish, or south of that in current day France, or Western Germany, or Southeast Belgium. You can see that those political borders that now we call France, Belgium, Luxembourg, or Germany are a joke to languages because regional languages have been there longer than those borders. And I had classes, taking courses from this very interesting professor, Joop Leersen at the University of Amsterdam, who actually won some prizes on the topic, Spinoza Prize, who said those political boundaries may change according to new agreements or wars fought out between countries or leaders. But the linguistic barriers or frontiers are different ones, and they are usually more stable. So once those peoples migrated, they have often remained in those areas, and those linguistic areas were shaped because of isolation, or not complete isolation. There was always trade, obviously, and other contacts, but the most frequent use of the language remained within certain areas in most of the cases of these Germanic, Romance, or Slavic or Celtic tribes. And therefore languages started, well, dialects really, from those languages I just mentioned, from Proto-Slavic, Proto-Germanic, Vulgar Latin, and Celtic, those mother languages and some others in Europe, uh, after those tribes settled and remained there for centuries and basically communicated within their societies that were relatively isolated from these other brother or sister languages across the mountains, for instance, then then you notice that those dialects evolve into languages that we in modern day we call languages, right? So something like Catalan, Portuguese, Spanish, and before were Iberian dialects from Vulgar Latin, right? And before that, obviously, it was Latin. So the Roman influence that obviously has its effect on the Romans' languages as no other, um, yeah, has exactly that effect. So Latin was first an official or officials had an official status in the Roman Empire, but then peasants or workers don't care about these official statuses and obviously converse in whatever is easy for them. And then you'll notice that this vulgar Latin, the Latin of the people, becomes a different version in each of these regions. And those dialects, with time, evolve into the languages we know now as French, Portuguese, and Italian. Okay, that's it for now. I hope you liked it. Please let me know in the comment section what you thought of this. This is my first video that I'm actually posting, and I want to do many more. I want to make a lot of videos on language, on the topic. I think it's very interesting. So let's see what you've got to say, and I can always evolve on on making the videos. Grazie. Ciao.